Hello, lovely listeners. Here we are discussing MergeGate yet again. If you followed along, you know what I'm talking about. If not, this all started with a Salon article that said in its title something I thought was pretty uncontroversial. It said, "New atheists merged with the far right." Imagine that! And the real issue began when some unexpected corners of the atheist scene were upset about it. I covered some of that in my previous episode. You can check that out if you haven't already. And, I really wish we could move on from this, but I feel like as long as supposedly progressive bros are putting out harmful, disingenuous defenses of new atheism, I kind of have to address that, because this stuff impacts me as a woman of color and as someone of Muslim background, unfortunately, a lot more than it does people who treat it as just some masturbatory intellectual exercise. And despite understanding the issues with some of these figures, they would rather quibble over individual words and over whether these people are actually new atheists or not. So here we are. And apologies to those of you who are waiting for an episode of Woken Up. I know. But I feel like I can't move on with the more granular, specific stuff while we're facing this recent revival of defending new atheism from the left. I thought that whether they overlapped with the far right or not was a settled thing among sensible people. And honestly, I know what right-wing atheists are saying about it. That's nothing new. But this has been concerning to me. It has felt like a betrayal, and it has felt personally threatening to be reopening these discussions from the left. I'm just going to briefly rehash it as I saw it. These are my views and interpretations and not the panel's. You can hear their views on the panel that's coming up. Anyway, in my previous episode, I covered Thomas Smith's defense of new atheism, and I thought I tried not to make it personal. I engaged with his points. I stuck to explaining why I thought they were extremely wrong and harmful. I tried not to single him out or put him on the spot, because even though I was pretty upset, I didn't want it to seem hostile. But from him, I saw a bunch of posts complaining about me personally on his Facebook and Twitter, calling me things like a liar, abuser, and troll for just saying, hey, maybe don't defend new atheism. He was ranting about, quote-unquote, victim mentality when it was said that someone in my position doesn't get that respect that a lot of straight white men do in this movement simply because of who we are. I saw him say this was rather convenient to frame my criticism as being about possible privilege from a cis white guy. I had more followers on Twitter than Thomas Smith, so how could that be? I could not believe the stuff I saw coming from people I thought were progressive. I couldn't fathom having to explain the idea of privilege not being related to Twitter follower count to people who I thought knew better. I've honestly been stunned at how this stuff echoes a lot of what I've heard from more centrist-y right-wing types over the years, especially the bits where we are lectured about the fact that we aren't trying to appeal to and convince Sam Harris fans, or how we should stop complaining and expecting the perfect movement to come along. It just sounds a lot like we should reach across the aisle, be civil, and the left continues to eat itself type discourse, you know? And also the constant efforts to shrink the definition of far right to basically only include self-identifying Nazis that were carrying tiki torches at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. That too is so reminiscent of IDW-esque, Harris-esque stuff. I'm sorry, but when your last president was a far-right hero, then it's not a tiny fringe anymore. And because these views are becoming more mainstream now, it doesn't make them less far-right. It should just make them more alarming. why minimize this shit at all? Why? It's just felt like, wow, if you're asked to introspect about your privilege, possibly giving you some blind spots, and sure, that can make you feel uncomfortable, but how do you suddenly end up lashing out and sounding like the people you would otherwise criticize? And how do you not recognize the similarities? I will say that this is not, and never has been, about negating the entirety of someone's work or progressive cred, though it is being strawmanned as that. This is about examining how certain types of privilege and resulting defensiveness infect things similarly across the political spectrum, leaving people from minority groups to fight these fights on multiple fronts. It is exhausting to have to do it over and over and over again. Anyway, I asked Thomas about 8 times after all his name calling, and he wouldn't respond to this one question about whether he had even heard the thing he was complaining about. So my guess is that he didn't even listen to it before he complained all those times. In fact, he was so mad, he claimed that despite knowing me for at least 6 years, I think, and having me on his show a couple of times, he hasn't ever listened to an episode of mine, which I know isn't true because we've discussed at least one, but there's that thing about the Podcasting Boys Club I mentioned in my previous episode, where they do not give me the same respect I have given them. I at least listened to the thing I wanted to criticize and engaged with it, but I do not get that in return. And this is nothing new. I have felt this weird friction for a couple of years at least, from several broadcasters. And I continue to feel validated about that observation because of the strange responses to my mild critique. I will link you to a Twitter thread about the chronology of all this that I did in the show notes as well. And it is unfortunate there's an overlapping audience in this case. I'm sure many of you are feeling confused and bewildered by this drama, and believe me, I am too, especially considering that people are raging at me without even hearing what I have to say, while treating others saying similar things as me with far more respect. But if you can't see that this isn't a both sides issue here, then I can't help you, really. Remember that it's always easy to point to other groups when people are behaving poorly, but when it matters most is when you take a principled stance within your own group, as difficult as that might be. In some ways, it seems like nothing has changed. Even as the more left side of movement atheism has kind of broken away from the right-wing types, because here we are in a situation where some left-leaning types are mirroring the same apologetics, and also some others are blaming not the people who started the literal semantic quibbles over the word merge for creating issues, but instead blaming the people who are pushing back and saying, hey, minimizing this stuff is harmful. And that's kind of how it's always been in the atheist scene, right? The feminists and the SJWs were always the hysterical troublemakers, and the ones minimizing the harmfulness of different awful things were the calm and rational ones, no matter how worked up they might actually be. So, since the previous episode, more people have risen up to defend the honor of New Atheism in worse and worse ways. The reopening of this topic, you can already see the harmful effects of it. It has delighted and emboldened some of the worst people in the atheist scene, and it is always minorities that are told now, even by some progressives, that the problems they are pointing out are either not real or not at all widespread. Just, fringe of the fringe of the fringe. Now, where have I heard that before? It's just so gaslighty. So, in this panel, we'll talk about the broader issues surrounding all this, but also specifically address some of the disappointing points that Eli Bosnick made. I thought I'd just name him because my lack of doing so last time was interpreted strangely as a hostile move, so why not try it the other way? However, you can't ever win when criticizing people, quote-unquote, on your own side, though I really have been questioning whether these defending new atheism type people are my side lately. But I'm sure some people will have an issue with this more direct approach too. Eli has interestingly refused to engage at all with my actual rebuttals to his apologetics on Twitter. But because these guys are continuously putting terrible things out and refusing to engage with my perspective, specifically my perspective, this is how I'm going to counter this stuff, and it is incredibly important to counter this stuff. I'm so sick of people minimizing it as low stakes or saying this whole thing is so minor. No, actually it's not. And that asymmetry in perception is really the root of the problem. For some, it is a minor intellectual exercise to quibble with words like merge, and for some, it is personally threatening to minimize the harm and literal far-right rhetoric that has been widespread in new atheism for many, many years. It is especially important because when it comes from the left, it provides more legitimacy and cover to the stuff that's going on, and some of us simply cannot afford for that kind of stuff to not be exposed. So if you exist within a very privileged group and this stuff matters to you, then it would be wonderful if you could use that privilege for good, rather than standing up for new atheism, of all things. Even once. Just why choose this hill at all? It's like someone deciding to defend Gamergate after all these years from the left because they enjoy video games or something and have now decided to take criticism of it very personally. Another point I wanted to highlight is that, growing up as a woman in a theocracy that sort of resembled Gilead, no one needs to tell me how important it is to fight for secularism and fight against the religious right. But far-right religious types cannot hide behind a veneer of science, logic, and reason. Far-right and right-wing atheists, however, can advance the same bigotries and agendas while claiming they are the reasonable ones. So that, too, has to be fought. Do not minimize that. Do not stand in the way of that. Defending new atheism. Maybe just don't. Now, let's head on to the panel where you'll hear from several godless content creators and their experiences with the scene. This has never been about demonizing atheism as a whole. Godlessness is fine and good, actually. This is only about recognizing that subsection and rottenness in the organized movement around it. Cherry picking does more harm than it does good here. So, if you know someone who has been defending new atheism from the left, and they are your friend, try to talk some sense into them, because a lot of damage has already been done. Don't both sides this shit, and just remember, friends shouldn't let friends defend or minimize the harms of new atheism. And as always, if you enjoy my work and want to show your support and get access to early releases, please consider subscribing via patreon.com/nicemangoes. It is because of listeners like you that this show exists, and you can help it survive and thrive. And now, on to part one of the panel. Yes, it's a two-parter.
Make sure that that program doesn't contain controversial subjects, and you're not impolite to people.
No, definitely not, Dad. You know me. I'm never, ever controversial or impolite.
Yeah, okay.
Welcome to Conversations with your lovable, never pisses anyone off, ex-Muslim host Aina, keeping it non-controversial. Hello and welcome to Panel 24. We are reporting live from the Battle of Ideas, folks. I have here today an absolutely fantastic godless panel to discuss this recent alarming revival of defending the honor of new atheism from the supposed left. How about people maybe just don't defend this shit? All right, let's see who we have on the panel. We've got 3 YouTubers. Chrisiosity, hello.
Hello.
How's it going? Thanks so much for joining us. Where can people find you and all that good stuff?
I am on Twitter and also on YouTube, and I'm always Chrisiosity, ChrisIouSity. So, pretty easy.
Awesome. And we've got Godless Cranium. Hello.
Hello. You can find me on Twitter and on YouTube under Godless Cranium.
And we have Vadim from the...
Formerly Creationist Cat. The channel's name is currently Hey It's Vadim, although if you search Creationist Cat, you will find Hey It's Vadim. I make comedic, political video essays and sometimes around pop culture, but through a left-wing lens. The best place to find me is my YouTube channel, but also I'm on Twitter at Hey It's Vadim, and in case you were wondering, my name is spelled Vadim, not EEM, as Mr. T once spelled it when he gave me an autograph. But yeah, I actually put in 3 E's. So none of those E's happened to be there, but I was polite enough not to point out that he misspelled it. But yeah, that's me, and I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. And last but not least, we have our far-right specialist, Daniel Harper. Hello, Daniel.
Hello, nice to be here. Nice to meet everyone. I mean, obviously I've met Ina before, but everybody else is someone I knew online, at least tangentially, who I now get to meet in person, which is nice. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Daniel E. Harper, and I do a podcast called I Don't Speak German, which is all about far-right dipshits and the things that they say when they don't think we're listening to them. You can find that at idon'tspeakgerman.libsyn.com. I also have a Patreon if you want to come and give me $1 for listening to all these assholes. You can do that too. So, yeah.
I will link all you guys' links in the show notes. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I honestly wish we were getting together here to talk about pretty much anything else, because I hate that we have to keep having this discussion, but some people would rather we don't move past this and don't evolve as a scene and stay stuck in 2014 perpetually. I mean, I thought I said everything I had to say about the defending of new atheism from the left in my previous episode, and I thought it was all fairly established already. I couldn't have imagined that this was going to be a controversial thing in 2021 for progressive atheists to admit and acknowledge just how far gone the new atheist scene was, and it is a widespread problem, and that it's not just a few bad apples. But fuck, I mean, I couldn't have imagined how wrong that assumption was, because now it's just cropping up. We've got a new rant or diatribe, I guess, from another atheist progressive podcaster, Eli Bosnick, and he's defending new atheism based on some of the same strange pedantic semantic arguments that Thomas Smith did earlier, that I covered in my last episode. And I tried the whole thing about being vague and polite and not naming anyone, but that got me a lot of hate as well, so I might as well just say who I'm talking about and talk specifically about what they said. So here we go. This all, just to refresh everyone's memories, stemmed from a Salon article by Phil Torres titled "Godless Grifters: How the New Atheists Merged with the Far Right." And bizarrely, that article led to multiple bros rising up to defend new atheism. I mean, I'd expect that from right-wing atheists. That's not even, that wouldn't be surprising at all. But what I wouldn't expect is for people who are progressive and critical of IDW figures to really stick their necks out for this, to really choose this hill and spend any time on it at all. So that's kind of like what we're here to talk about today, and the individual experiences of the people in the panel. So what are you guys' thoughts on all this?
I guess my main point, I think a lot of people are very upset that the article was called New Atheism Merged with the Far Right, right? And just for the interest of full disclosure, I had looked at and proofread some bits and pieces for Phil before he put that out. So it wasn't like I had a huge part of it. And what I have said, and what I think is consistently my problem, is if your argument is that, sure, New Atheism helped along, or aided and abetted, or provided a way for people to get, more access to the alt-right, but they didn't merge with the far right. Merge is too far. Like, I think you're upset about the wrong thing.
Yeah, for sure.
I think you need to be concerned about why this aspect of the movement got so chummy with the far right and had them on. We're talking about people who either whitewashed or supported figures like Milo Yiannopoulos or Stefan Molyneux, people like that. And I, at the same time that they were being very critical of the left and, acting as if the left has lost its mind. They're, you can't even talk to these people, but you can certainly talk to Charles Murray or Douglas Murray,
And that didn't change. Even as, the pendulum swung further and further right, they didn't really switch gears or anything to balance things out. They just kept going harder and harder and harder at the left.
Yeah, so I think that has to be looked at. That's what's important, and it's a lot more important than whether or not merged is the right word. Like, I probably wouldn't have called it that. I'm not Salon. I like to be very clear and specific in my putting things forward, and I don't think that was the ideal way to put it. But that is hardly what I'm even remotely concerned about. I'm far more concerned about their coziness with the far right.
Right. I mean, I don't mind the word merged because I really do think they did, but I don't think Phil chose it either.
I do agree with everything that Chrissy said, yet at the same time, I guess in the same way that these people have been a little kind of overly picky, maybe I'm going to be, but I think I'm right here. The word merge, you can like quibble about it, but if you actually look at the definition, it means a variety of things. It doesn't just mean to kind of like, morph into something. It also means to unite with, to join forces, to combine with, integrate. I mean, it has a whole kind of variety of meanings. It's not just one thing. And under those guises, I think that the word, to me, sounds appropriate.
It is appropriate, I think, too. I mean, this article left out a bunch of stuff, like, for example, how James Lindsay was going with sovereign nations, which, I mean, the very name itself should be a tip-off that it's a far-right thing. And Dawkins then tweeted out about how good it was. He took it down later when he got called on it. But I mean, like, these are all things that show that they've merged with the far-right.
I've got it in front of me. I was actually just going to read the actual title because in the subhead, because this is such a tempest in a teapot about this. But the title is literally Godless Grifters, How the New Atheist Merged with the Far Right. And then the subhead is, what once seemed like a bracing intellectual movement has degenerated into a pack of abusive, small-minded bigots. And then the article goes on to describe exactly how what once seemed like a bracing intellectual movement has degenerated into a pack of abusive, small-minded bigots. And I just want to point this out right here at the beginning, is that no one in this argument, no one in this kerfuffle, no one wanting to argue about this, seems to really care about the actual text of the article and the actual, like, everyone seems to agree that the article is actually well written and accurate as far as it goes. The whole thing is about this, like, idea that, like, we have to have this semantic debate about the word merged and who actually are the new atheists and all that sort of thing. And it's like, it's such a, like, isn't this supposed to be a movement based on, like, reason and understanding and communication and facts and reality? And it just feels like this is such a, like, it's just so, like, silly to me that this is the thing that we continually have to, like, argue about, is, like, we go to the dictionary to determine the meaning of the word merged, as opposed to acknowledging the truth of the things that are in the actual article, and maybe we should be dealing with that in a better way than what we are, right? You know?
Well, the one podcast though seemed to be more about the longer one. I can't remember.
That's
who
Thomas's.
did it.
Yeah.
Thomas's seemed to be more about being pedantic even on a higher level than that, because it was like, well, these things are true, but they're not far right. You could find people doing this in the Democratic Party, so therefore, you know, and in that case, then there's just that word is like the far right itself would just be like there's no point in using that word, right? Because you could say that about anything, right? Like, can you find people in a leftist group that might believe this thing? Yeah, you could. It's a far right idea, right? Like, I mean, being xenophobic, that kind of stuff, it's all, you know, I don't know. It made me angry when I was listening to it, but
I'd like to point out another, what I think is just an overall huge mistake that both of these podcasters made in relation to the article, which is that they both took it as an indictment of atheists everywhere, of every atheist out there. And, you know, the article, Dan recited the text of the article, and it makes it very clear that it's not talking about atheists everywhere. And then this might sound kind of silly, but the picture, it's not a picture of, say, I don't know, a bunch of people hanging around with hats that say, like, I hate God or whatever. It's a picture of specific people that they discuss over the course of the article, and it's just like nothing in the text or the photograph that they supplied should lead us to believe that it's an indictment of all atheists everywhere.
But don't you think that was by design, or do you think that was like an accident? Like, I think it's very much like a switch, like a rhetorical Mott and Bailey kind of, oh, here's what they're saying about new atheists. Look, they're talking about all of you atheists who, here's the Pew poll to show, like, how progressive atheists are as a demographic group.
That's what I was going to bring up, was a demographic. So, like, they said in the thing, like, so like they're more progressive, which is true in polls. But I mean, like, if you talk to anybody and you say, if you give them a poll question to most atheists and say, are you pro-trans, just for example, they're going to say yes. But that doesn't mean, like, Michael Shermer would say yes. He said so in a Twitter thing where he said, yeah, I'm pro-trans, but I don't think they should be competing in the Olympics. Like, so if he was taking that poll, he'd be in there as a progressive, you know. And
yeah, I'm pro-trans, but hey, you got pronouns in your bio. You know, I mean, things like that.
Like, racists don't think that they're racists.
Right. And Sam Harris also says, you know, he's very pro-trans rights, but then he laughs along with Douglas Murray being incredibly viciously, cruelly transphobic, saying that people are doing it for attention, or, you know, he recently called it like a social contagion. Just awful.
Transphobia is a huge problem in the atheist, like, online atheist community. I don't know about outside of online, but I mean, online, they infest, transphobes infest a lot of the audience. I know from personal experience, after I made a video that was pro-trans, two actually, and after both, I lost significant amount of subscribers and support. So, and like, my videos, if you watch them from before, a lot of the times I'm talking about LGBT issues because they're important to me. But for a lot of atheists, those issues are used to, like, bludgeon religion, and it's not really because they care about those issues. It's because it's an easy way to get to hit at religious.
Right. This is what they do with Islam, right? It's like, oh, Muslims are so homophobic, but then you show them an article that says, Muslims in North America are actually less homophobic than evangelicals, and then there'll be some other excuse why Muslims are worse, and that turns into, we got to be careful who we let in because someone could be a jihadist, or it's just. It's such a disingeneous discussion.
I think there's a lot of confusion. Like you said, Ina, like this Mott and Bailey thing that goes on because, there's atheists, there's non-believers, which is a very big group. There are new atheists who are, sort of movement atheists in the... that either followed or were brought over into atheism after the 9/11 attacks and who took a very aggressive stance to their atheism. And all of these things are different things. And, I know that some people object to new atheism because they say, well, people will think that is just atheists that are new. It's like, I'm sorry, but that's what they were called. No one called me and said, what do you think of this terminology? That's just the title that they lived under. Yeah, I was very frustrated by people saying things like, James Lindsay couldn't be considered a new atheist because he was not particularly popular or... and that, he wrote 4 atheist books.
Right,
4.
but how many Amazon reviews did they get, Chrissy?
I don't care, because he was a part of this. He was a part of this movement. He was not, if the kind of books that you're writing are as terrible as James Lindsay's writings tend to be, I'm not surprised they didn't pick up steam. However, he did meet a lot of the people. And those people continue to retweet him and to, give him a little bit of boosting now and then as well.
Absolutely.
I'd like to bring up just very quickly, even though that I don't think that Wikipedia is necessarily an authority on what is or isn't new atheism, I just wanted to point out that all of the individuals that are listed in the article, with the exception of James Lindsay, are mentioned in the Wikipedia article for new atheism, and as is also people like David Silverman, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. There's a few others that are probably not coming to my mind right now, and I only mention this just to emphasize that this is not a rigidly defined thing. People have different ideas of what it is, and that's understandable and okay. And they just kind of both approached it as though, no, atheism is this one thing right here, and it's not just one thing. It's do you guys understand what I'm saying here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's changed form even too. The new atheist movement has kind of morphed into the IDW and this whole anti-woke skeptosphere now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like they merged.
Exactly. Exactly like that. When I'm putting paints on a palette, if I'm putting my blue and my red together and they kind of merge in the middle, I won't be like they're not merging because the blue didn't turn into the red or the red didn't turn into the blue. As long as they're kind of mixing and overlapping, they're merging.
Yeah, they merge on the enemies that they have in common, right? So for them, it's the woke. Evangelical Christians a lot of times have things against the woke, so they merge. They fight together against those fronts that they believe are dangerous to them.
Yeah,
so,
and I've pointed to very specific things where these people have overlapped on, like rhetoric and promotion and sympathies towards the far right. in my previous episode. But my episode, by the people that complained about it the most, those are the people that did not listen to it, because they kept asking questions about things that I had already answered. Oh yeah, well, what does she think about this? And it's like, can you just listen to what I had to say? Like, no, that's not doable.
I know this is not a movement built on knowing things and doing research and having facts at hand. You only can look at individual tweets and respond angrily in kind. That is what this movement is built on, fundamentally. Yeah.
Now, since I've responded mostly to Thomas's very specifically, I wanted to point some of the stuff that Eli Bosnick, who also won't acknowledge my existence anymore. We've had no interactions or confrontations about this, but because I guess he found it so appalling that I dared to criticize his friend, he, I don't know, unfollowed me and then muted me, perhaps, because he's not engaging with me or responding to anything I say in opposition to his nonsense points. But some of the things that he said were really, really something, and I think they should be pointed out, like how he said...
Yeah.
Can I just highlight something here that was like one of my favorite things in the thing is, and we kind of touched on this earlier, but this idea that like the article, that the headline is referring to any new atheist, like lowercase n, lowercase a.
Yeah. This is. Let me just read the quote, and then you can talk about that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this one thing that Eli says is most people who read that article aren't going to think of 4 authors and a couple of jerks. They're going to think of atheists who are new. Again, because of how words work. And then he goes on to compare it to when you're talking about, oh, I don't like new movies or new music. No one's going to think of like a specific set of movies or music. It's just so disingenuous. It hurts my head because, go on, take it away, Daniel.
Well, it's even worse than that, right? And like, I don't know Eli personally. I've never spoken to him. But when Eli comes out there and then says, like, you're the ones being smeared, and I love this movement. I love this so hard. Everything that we do, all these civil rights that we do in this movement is so important. And this article, Salon and Phil Torres are smearing you, the listener, the heroes who support me in this podcast, and my friend Thomas Smith. You really get that, like, sense of, like, you know, he's created this kind of us versus them thing.
Oh, yeah. I found it very creepy.
And he's trying to create this idea. Yeah, he's trying to create this, like, that the audience is being smeared by this article and by extension, you know, this podcast and my podcast. And, you know, the reality is that, like, we're all adults here trying to have a conversation about things that matter. And, like, you know, this kind of rhetorical technique, like, I don't think he literally believes that this headline could be misinterpreted this way. I think that's, I'm happy to kind of treat that in good faith if you would like to have that conversation, but I don't think that that's a reasonable interpretation of this headline that anyone can mean. And the only way I can interpret that little bit of the podcast segment that he did is that it is like deliberately obfuscatory and it is deliberately built to you know, kind of create this like bond between the listener and the host. You know.
Also, though, like, atheism really doesn't have much to do with anything besides atheism, right? Like, if you're fighting for social justice, it's because you believe in social justice issues, not because you're an atheist, right? Like, you can be an atheist and believe in garbage, as this article clearly points out, right? So true. And a lot of times, that's my critique of a lot of online atheists, is that all they talk about is that God doesn't exist. But what else do you believe? Because you could be giving Patreon money to somebody like Richard Dawkins, you know, like somebody with that kind of personality, and not know it because they never talk about anything else besides atheism, which, you know, it's pretty easy to talk about. So
that actually reminds me of another thing that he says within the podcast, which I thought was a little bizarre. At a certain point, he claims that he recognizes that Harris hasn't always been a good faith actor or has said some yikesy things, which is good. But then he goes on to say that the major pushback to Sam Harris occurred within atheist circles. And it just makes me think, what reality are you living in? Because I've seen such, a wide variety. I have seen some atheists push back against Sam Harris, but I've seen a great deal of people who were not atheists who did so. And the overwhelming majority, I think, of at least the online atheist movement and those who are influencers certainly still, maybe they'll point out some things about Sam Harris that aren't great, but overall they still very much respect him and will not call him out nearly as much as I think they should. But I don't think that's being. My point is, I don't think that that's being spearheaded by the atheist movement by any means. This pushback against Sam Harris.
No, the idea that Sam Harris has been rejected by the atheists is just ludicrous.
Yeah.
He's one of the most celebrated big-name atheists to this day, and pushback against him comes from everywhere, including some atheists. Like, we're all atheists for sure, but that is not who is the most popular people in the movement at all.
Yeah, that was the point I was going to make, is that the popular support lies with people like Sam Harris and his supporters. It doesn't lie with people like me, or even Vadim,
or me.
Although Vadim's bigger than I am. But I mean, that's not where, like, if somebody makes a video, like I guarantee if I made a video, which I might do sometime in the future, about Sam Harris, and it was really negative, I would get tons of pushback from that, probably from other atheist creators that support them bigger than I am. So, it's just not true. It's
yeah, I mean, and the idea that the new atheist movement, even if you define it specifically, includes only just 4 authors and a couple of jerks, that is absolutely not true. This is kind of like the Sam Harris thing, where you want to define something you don't like so narrowly, and also like a religious apologist kind of thing, like how conservative Muslims do this all the time. Like, no, these are not true Muslims. Terrorists, no, not true Muslims. ISIS, no, not true Muslims. It's like, that's highly convenient. Someone you don't approve of is not a true Muslim or a true atheist, and someone you like, those are the true ones. Yeah, that's...
Well, even when Dawkins got his humanist award stripped, how many people that were, in the atheist community were mad about that? Like, there was a lot. A lot.
So
I made a video saying they were right, and I got a lot of pushback, and also there was much bigger creators than me saying, yes, they shouldn't have taken that award. No, they should have. Like, he's not a humanist, right? Like, I mean, if you look at the picture of the 4 horsemen, there's 2 transphobes, one that defended the 2 transphobes, and someone that's dead, right? Like, I mean, that's their identity. That's who they are. So.
Yeah.
I mean, and notice that, like, Daniel Dennett kind of, like, left these circles a long time ago and does not, like, he doesn't get the kind of acclaim that these other guys do. Like Sam Harris, I just looked it up on Spotify, has the number 6 science podcast in the world. I wish that I were as marginalized by the atheist community as Sam Harris is.
He also had the number 1 podcast for a while with Ricky Gervais.
Right, totally not an atheist either. A new atheist.
Not a new atheist. Yeah, he's not a new atheist either.
Yeah, really, if we talk about someone who really never talks about his atheism or his disdain for religion, certainly, Ricky Gervais would be high up on that list, right? Yeah.
No, but these guys are not new, right? They've been around for a few years. You can't really say they're new atheists.
It's also kind of weird to be concerned about representing people like me, right? Like I hate that when, like, if I say I'm an atheist, they're like, oh, so you're like Sam Harris or like something. I don't want to be associated with that.
Well, that really kind of touches on something else that I wanted to bring up, which is that in Eli rant that we're talking about, he really, in my opinion, minimizes the importance or the relevance of online atheists, or meaning YouTube atheists. And I wish that wasn't the case, because I'm not crazy about the general YouTube atheist sphere. I think that at best you have to be kind of a milquetoast like a centrist in order to survive in that environment. But these people are literally getting hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of views for their videos. They are very much influencers within the community, and it's just like I just think he's wrong about that. And not only that, all those people. Let me tell you just a quick story. I've had, over the course of my time on the internet, I've had patrons come and go, and I've literally had, and I'm not going to name names, but I've literally had 3 people who were reasonably successful. These are people with over 100,000 subscribers who were successful career atheist YouTubers who wrote me, and they said, listen, I want you to know that I really enjoy your channel, and I actually agree with a lot of kind of the political points that you make, but could you do me a favor and not put me in your in your credits, because unfortunately there are, it's not an association that would be good for my brand. It sounds kind of slimy the way that I'm saying it, but they wrote it in ways that I did not personally take offense. And I think that says a lot, that there are YouTubers who will kind of bite their tongue and are not speaking on certain matters because they understand that the entire YouTube atheist sphere is at best centrist, and you can't often speak out against people like Sam Harris and Dawkins without getting a lot of a lot of flack.
Yeah, it's you either have to be a centrist, or you have to be, or you can either be right centrist, or just not talk about it at all ever. Like just talk about that there's no God and the reasons why, and don't talk about anything else. And I know a lot of the YouTube atheist, creators, and that's what they do. And also a lot of times what they'll do is if there's somebody that's causing waves or whatever, speaking out, they'll get together and say, let's not talk about this person. We'll pretend that they don't exist, and then their channel will die. So, it happens to me. It happened to me, and it still happens whenever I talk, like all the time. I spend more time criticizing atheists now than I do religious people, because to me, they seem like a bigger issue. But I mean, maybe not a bigger issue overall, but I mean, in my sphere where I kind of like go, move around.
Right. Online. People should be concerned about their own circles too, right? Like, we can do 2 things at one time as well. We can be critical of the larger religious right, and also, wow, our circles here are doing some disturbing things. We must speak out against this. Well,
yeah, and it also is just, and like, for me, it's hypocritical, right? Because you're saying like stuff like, well, the Catholic Church won't, admit that they're wrong. And stuff like that, and then your movement is doing the exact same thing. So
yep. And do you think this is kind of like why there's a certain amount of tribalism in people who still kind of very heavily invested in their identity as an atheist, or even more with people who, like, say, have atheist in their brand? And I know you have godless in your brand, GC, but I know Vadim and myself, we have both suffered from speaking out against this stuff in terms of our Patreon and growing our audience. Oh, yeah. But I felt that it was something that should be done because I didn't want to be holding my tongue or pandering to these types of people. And I just wanted a better audience, people that I relate to. I did not want...
That's exactly the same journey that I'm going through. I went 6 months without uploading anything because after I put out a video criticizing a larger creator, my comment section was at least 50% transphobic, and it really affected me mentally. And really made me question what I was doing online, because I was like, am I doing something that has made it seem to these people that I'm the person they want to be listening to? Like, am I contributing to this transphobia in some way that I'm not aware of? So I took like 6 months where I just thought about it. And I almost quit YouTube, and I came back. But the reason why I came back is because I think that there's very few leftist atheists in the community, and I want to create like a space where people can say they don't feel alone, like other leftists, right? Other trans people, other minority groups, right? So I know that's why I came back, but and at the time I thought I'm not gonna hold back. From now on, when I see other atheists doing shitty things online, I'm going to talk about it, which I've done. So I know exactly what you're talking about. I lost probably 2/3 of my Patreon. I've lost probably 2,000 or 3,000 subscribers. And I still lose subscribers. Every time I put out a video, I lose more subscribers. So
I've definitely been there. I'm actually curious because Chrissy said something in the opening, and maybe that was before we started recording. She said, that it depends on the day whether or not she really wants to identify herself as an atheist. And I was just wondering, Chrissy, like, when. What was like your journey? Like when did all of this did that that label start kind of? When did you start realizing that label was just kind of not the best thing ever?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things, because when I came on in YouTube, there was this extraordinary anti-feminist, anti-leftist. The schism had already happened between and Elevator Gate, and all of that had happened previously. And so what happened was I came on and I was more talking about feminism. I was talking about leftist politics in general. And, of course, a lot of the people that embraced me were other feminists and other people. And I also met up with certain atheists. And so, like, I remember, I don't think he does videos very much anymore. There was this guy, Oscar Jungel. He did a lot of skepticism and atheism videos, and we were very friendly. And he kind of was like, oh, well, come on to my channel, and we're going to talk about, completely... actually, we were going to talk about astrology and Dr. Oz, because he had a thing. And I just told him, like, you're going to lose subscribers if I come on your channel. And he did.
Ugh.
And,
doesn't this, sorry, not to interrupt, but like, doesn't all of this just say everything you need to say about the reality of this response from these guys? That no new atheism, the atheist movement is pushing back against this. It's better than this, and then like every person with kind of an atheist branded following has said, oh yeah, by talking about left-wing issues I actually lost a ton of subscribers and like lost a lot of money, and it's been like incredibly hurtful to my prospects. It's just,
it's not even just that. I had the exact same experience as Christiosity in that as well. I had a trans creator that I really liked at the time, and I wanted to help promote their channel, and they told me right out, they said, if you have me on your channel, you're going to lose subscribers. And I was like, no. Like, I talk about LGBT issues all the time. What are you talking about? And sure enough, it happened. It was like a couple hundred, but definitely got pushed back in the comment section as well. So yeah, it's definitely a problem. Like, I don't even know how to emphasize the transphobia that's present in the atheist community. Like, it's really toxic and really bad. Like, it's not just a few people, it's a good chunk of people.
And similarly with the anti-Muslim stuff, right? Like, I used to feel so alone, especially because the ex-Muslim scene is like an even smaller niche of the new atheist scene, and possibly even more reactionary, and because like they're fetishized and they're propped up and rewarded based on how awful they can be. You want to compare Muslims to Nazis? Oh yeah, here, take a Sam Harris retweet. Sam Harris called this woman who compares Muslims to Nazis all the time his hero, not specifically for those tweets of hers, but indirectly he props people up like that all the time. And it is just horrifying to witness, So when I am like this ex-Muslim that's not towing that line, immediately I'm ostracized and shunned and piled on. And it's just been so hurtful to see supposed progressive people from the atheist scene who I thought kind of understood what was happening here to repeatedly minimize and just dismiss these experiences of minorities that are really have been harmed and hurt by this scene. It just comes across as so pompous and arrogant and privileged, and they don't even realize how they sound. It is appalling, I'll let Daniel talk more about this quote, but at one point
I know where this is going. It's okay. Go ahead.
Eli was saying, you know who's merged with the far right? Evangelical Christians. People chanting Jews will not replace us at Charlottesville. Those were Christians. And politicians, making bills banning CRT. And you don't get to scale the meaning of far right back to interviewed a racist on their podcast when it's convenient for your dialogue. And this is not a defense of their podcast, it's a defense of the English language.
Oh man, there's so much to unpack there. I mean, right off the bat, just like Harris didn't just interview a racist, he championed the racist.
It's not one racist.
And right. Well, I guess I'm talking specifically about Charles Murray here, but yes, there are other racists. And on top of that, he agreed with, like, it's not like he had these people on and was like, fighting against everything, against them tooth and nail. It was like, yes, you really have a good point here about skull sizes. I'm being joking slightly, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yes. Some pedant is going to come and say, point me to the exact quote where he said, you have some good thoughts on skull sizes.
Like, he kind of set it up to that he was telling a hard truth, right? Like, it was a truth that nobody else wanted to talk about, is how he...
Forbidden knowledge, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So there's that as well.
But Daniel, why don't you talk more about the Charlottesville Jews will not replace us?
All those Christians in Charlottesville, right?
That's right.
So, first of all, the term alt-right, like New Atheism, etc., is like many political labels, is a loose, changing term. It kind of fits the thing that it fits, and so one thing that Bosniak does in that podcast bit is he kind of conflates far right with alt-right a little bit, which is. I think that's just sloppy thinking on his part. But like, as someone who has spent many years now delving into the furthest reaches of the alt-right, to people who are further to the right than the alt-right, who think the alt-right are cucks, believe me, I understand what's going on in this movement. And no one, to my knowledge, has ever done like a demographic breakdown of like all the people who marched in Charlottesville on August 12th, 2017. But I can tell you that the three kind of ringleaders of the alt-right movement in August 2017 were Richard Spencer, Andrew Anglin, and Mike Enoch, Mike Pinovich of the Right Stuff, who is the main host of the podcast The Daily Shoah, in case you want to know just how awful this stuff gets. All three of those people were atheists, and are atheists. Anglin may have some kind of weird beliefs because he's kind of just an ultimate troll, and I don't know kind of where he is, but he's certainly not like an evangelical Christian. And in fact, most people came to the alt-right because they were rejecting the kind of like evangelical Christianity of their parents, and like this was a really common recurring theme. Christopher Cantwell, the crying Nazi, came out of the atheist scene. Like he comes out of libertarianism more precisely, but he was then and is now a self-described atheist. When you do find religious people, you find this sort of like weird kind of Norse paganism is pretty common in certain segments of it, and then sort of like Orthodox, like Eastern Orthodox or Greek Orthodox or Russian Orthodox. Some of these guys kind of come from that scene, but the number who are like kind of traditional evangelical evangelical Christians of the kind of moral majority Jerry Falwell type. It's just not true. I mean, it's just like you do find that occasionally, but that is a vast, vast minority. And if you're claiming that those people who are saying Jews will not replace us because of Judaism as a religion, you just fundamentally don't understand what was going on at that time. And that's fine if you don't understand it, but you shouldn't be talking about it. That's my opinion of it.
Yeah, and I also did a podcast called Are Too Many Atheists Veering Towards the Alt-Right with Chris Stedman and James Croft back in 2018, atheist activists. And I'm just going to read some stuff from Chris Stedman's Vice article on the topic. Richard Spencer, the white supremacist and movement figurehead who coined the term alt-right, discussed his atheism last year in an interview with atheist blogger David McAfee. When he put the interview on his own website, Spencer retitled it The Alt-Right and Secular Humanism, leaving no doubt that he sees atheism and humanism as linked to his cause.
Although, the version of humanism that involves peaceful ethnic cleansing is no form of humanism.
Obviously.
But
I mean, neither does Dawkins's, abort Down syndrome babies humanism, right?
Right.
If I could interject, in no way, I think, are any of us trying to minimize Christofascism or
Absolutely
the
not.
extreme right evangelical Christianity and the harm that they do, which I think is devastating, and I think we are all just enemies of completely.
Mm-hmm.
But we are just refusing to take a blind eye, therefore. I was looking up some stuff today. In 2015, they looked at Reddit threads, and they found that the atheist Reddit thread was the most bigoted and racist and promoted that stuff the most. It was like the red pill, Opie and Anthony.
That's exactly what my next quote was going to be. Yeah, exactly.
There's definitely nationalists like Lauren Chen, for example, that are just as dangerous as,
And if I could just continue, it's very frustrating. It's very gaslighting to have had these people come after you and then being told they don't exist. It's...
Yeah.
I know that some people have said, oh, well, you're just talking about online atheists now. And first of all, I don't have the details on online atheists versus non-online atheists, and I don't think anybody else does either. I don't think they're hermetically sealed off. But we are concerned with the online atheist groups because, as with the far right and the alt-right, they do a lot of looking for new recruits online. That's where they go.
Right.
That's where a lot of this stuff happens. So that's why we're concerned about it, the stuff that's happening online. And I have trouble believing that it's just the online atheists who then never go out and never want to be in, say, go to a convention or anything. And that puts marginalized people who would also go to the convention and maybe not be online atheists, that puts them at risk, that you're not looking at this, you're not taking this seriously. Let's face it, atheism is a white male demographic, largely, people who call themselves atheists specifically. So that leaves them open to being a key group for the alt-right to look at and the far-right to look at for recruits. And especially if they can convince you that your enemy is women, your enemy is brown people from Syria, as opposed to what we know that your enemy really is, that are more, have more power and have the ability to harm you in your real life.
Right.
The more that they could just pull you in.
And also, like Sam Harris, for example, said that atheism didn't have an estrogen vibe or something. So you've got the misogyny that runs through. But one other thing I wanted to bring up really quick is that online atheism also has a history of kind of bringing in that debate bro culture. So they'll support podcasts or debate style places that just really treat minority issues as if they're something for entertainment, and stuff like that. And that culture is also very, very damaging to anybody in marginalized communities. So I think that's one other point that kind of merges with the right wing, because the whole idea is to find a right winger that is a bigot, and then find one that's not a bigot, and then face them off and pretend that you're impartial and that you're just having this conversation, and they're both equally valid, but they're not, right? So I think that's very dangerous, and I think online atheism has done a lot to kind of bring that culture to YouTube and places like that. So
right. So let me just read this other quote from the same article that I was reading. By neglecting to address its darker currents, online atheism has perhaps unknowingly planted the seeds for the alt-right's harvest. 3 years ago, Reddit's atheism subforum, perhaps the largest community of atheists on the internet, was found to be the website's third most bigoted. Meaning not just tolerant of overt displays of bigotry, but actively supportive of them. Last year, the Daily Beast revealed that the study's most bigoted Reddit subforum, The Red Pill, was founded by Robert Fisher, a Republican state lawmaker who was also an atheist. So once again, what was Eli saying? You know who's merged with the far right? Evangelical Christians, people chanting Jews will not replace us at Charlottesville, and politicians making bills banning CRT. I mean, I think all of those can be disproven. Who do you think is helping the politicians making bills banning CRT currently? It's James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian.
I want to say real quickly, sort of piggybacking on some of the points that have been made recently, is just that again, in both of these podcasts, the individuals, I think they make these points that are like, because of this, because of attitudes like this, we're not able to focus on things like Christian fascism and, I guess, more broadly, just the negative effects of religion on our culture. And I think that that's too bad as well. But I think that it's actually, you have to think about it. And it's like, well, a big reason why the atheist community is not kind of the the teacher or just the critic that it could be, that it's not taken as seriously or not as effective in being critical of these things, is because of the fact that so many of these people who are the main influencers do have these right-wing tendencies and ties and have statements and actions. Do you hear me? It's like it could. I would love to be a more vocal proponent for atheism if I felt like it was in a place where it just didn't have all this other baggage, and therefore, under that moniker or that group, I could advocate for certain things. It just, I feel like by now bringing in atheism into the conversation, there's just all this baggage that comes with it, and I can't effectively talk about social justice issues without understandably turning people off. So it just sucks.
I also think that YouTube kind of bears some of the responsibility as well, right? Because their algorithms and stuff like that, they kind of push people to stream, which means that you're not going to get, I'm not trying to put down streamers, but I mean, like, a lot of times you get streamers that just talk and then they make really bad points because they haven't researched it or they haven't watched the entire video, stuff like that. So, but that helps the algorithm. And also, they monetize hate, there's that. But also, I think what online atheism did was it started out with religion, but then they had to find another quote unquote religion to attack once that got boring. And so they moved on to feminism, and then from feminism they moved on to race and CRT and that kind of thing. So I think that's kind of the trajectory that it kind of leads. So it's also if your whole brand is to attack people and stuff like that, and I have some of that on mine. I do a lot of response videos. Then that could be a road that it leads down, and I think people have to be aware of that and stop it before it gets to the point where it is now, right?
There was another point that he makes that is, I guess he's offhandedly joking, but I thought it was very manipulative regardless. He mentions, what the conventions are like. Are any of these people at the conventions? Forget the fact that, like, they're not talking about conventions at all within the article, but more so at a certain point he says, like, no crosses were burned when I was there, maybe after I left. And again, I know that he's making a hyperbolic joke, but it helps serve this idea that you have to do the most outrageous, most blatantly racist thing in order to, like, be far right. No, you can or
merge with the far right.
Merge with them. And there's just like a chasm between, like you don't have to just do that. There's so many things in between that. And so by saying that, he's like kind of creating this false dichotomy. If they're not burning crosses, well, then they're not far right.
And also, what about
and also Charles Murray did burn a cross when he was a teenager.
But not at an atheist conference while wearing a New Atheist t-shirt.
Not at an atheist conference. Well, we don't know. He didn't describe the circumstances, but it might have been an atheist conference in 1962 or whatever, but,
But if it was at an atheist conference, was he wearing a t-shirt that said, "I am a new atheist"?
Well, and again, when we talk about conferences, they mentioned some conferences. There were some conferences they very specifically didn't mention.
Yeah.
And they very specifically also didn't mention some of the issues that have gone on that really have never been resolved. So you get somebody like people from Atheism Plus talking about how they want to put in things about sexual harassment. Then you get Thunderfoot all upset about it. He's definitely a new atheist. He goes to conferences. He loves the debates. And he's saying exactly what these guys are saying now, which is our real enemy is Christianity. Stop bitching, stop making noise about this other problem. It doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. You need to focus on not dividing our wonderful atheist group because we need to fight Christianity. So I don't really want to hear that from people now who say that they're progressive, because then you have Thunderfoot going into Gamergate, going into all these other bullshit right-wing stuff because he's so mad that somebody said, well, I don't feel comfortable. He specifically mentions the Reason rallies, Eli did. And I personally, I don't know if anybody else was around for it, but there were huge controversies because of just a few basic progressive safety rules about not harassing people that were put in that had people go nuts. And it hurt turnout. It hurt all kinds of things. So, like, by not acknowledging these issues, that they are continuous, that they keep popping up, I'm certain it hurt not just people like me or Godless Cranium last year when the whole debacle with the Austin
ACA.
The ACA, yes, came up, and they were the whole issues around transphobia. These are harmful, and that they keep happening is harmful, and that we're never dealing with the basic problems and really looking at this not as a problem of one-offs, but as a problem that is a consistent issue within this particular movement. If this was, as I kind of had said, if this was a problem with feminism, and there are problems with feminism, turfism is a big problem with feminism. Do you think I deny that? Do you think I minimize it? No, you fight that.
Though to be fair, there are many turfs that are just not feminist at all. They don't brand themselves in any feminist way.
True.
But yeah, I have no issues when someone is trying to frame themselves as a feminist to say that's some bullshit feminism right there.
It's also always incumbent on the marginalized person or community to be polite to the people that are attacking them, which is a real problem. It's
so fucking frustrating. So here I was making a polite-ish rebuttal, addressing the points, not singling anyone out, and talking about really how hurtful and betrayed I felt, how hurtful it was, and how betrayed I felt by someone who I thought was in my corner, kind of minimizing these things and using their platform to defend something as atrocious, as bigoted as new atheism. And then I was called by Thomas Smith an abuser, a troll, and he said that, he agreed with someone saying that I was enjoying his pain because I did a laugh emoji. And just
it's those laugh emojis that are really, those are the real symbols of bigotry.
I mean, I felt like I was in some kind of bizarro upside down world where I am a minority person who people like my family have experienced violence. There was just an attack in Canada where a Muslim family taking a walk was driven over just because of their appearance, and that kind of stuff terrifies me. And there is so much anti-Muslim rhetoric that has come from this scene in the past years. It has terrified me, and it has put me off completely. As much as I dislike and want to criticize Islam, I do not want to participate in any anti-Muslim bigotry. That is all I was asking, is that please re-examine your minimization, because it can really hurt people like me and other minorities. And I was called the abuser, and I was called the troll, and I was supposedly enjoying his pain because I did a laugh emoji at some point. Just absurd. Whereas he was playing the victim while saying, oh, what is this victim mentality? When Daniel said something about, oh, Ina, she has a lot of experience with the new atheist movement, but doesn't get the same respect that a lot of other people do because of being an opinionated woman in the scene. And so Thomas went under his thread instead of responding to me, and he was like, what is this victim mentality? And, oh, that's a convenient way to frame it. Anyone who disagrees with Ina is just a cis white male, blah, 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 blah. Is this like something you expect from a progressive man, just being asked to re-examine? Perhaps he might have some blind spots because of his privileged perspective. It's just been so eye-opening.
Just to pick up on the thread of the kind of Islamophobia stuff, it is worth noting that Sam Harris wrote The End of Faith, which is arguably the beginning of New Atheism, was the publication of The End of Faith. Immediately after 9/11, he starts writing this book specifically to examine the motherlode of bad ideas, which was Islam, and was kind of brought to kind of like the bestseller circuit and kind of became a big name, in part because that's during the period of the kind of rah-rah Iraq War era. And it's worth noting that like Dawkins, Harris, and Hitchens all kind of built their early careers on being proponents of the Iraq War. And so, not to get all like, Noam Chomsky manufacturing consent on you or anything, but it is funny how like the people who became like kind of the figureheads of this movement, who became like the big names, were precisely the people that were advocating an aggressive U.S. foreign policy that murdered like 1 million Iraqis.
Yeah, and now they have ex-Muslims who are translating IDW books into Arabic and sending them to Baghdad because they haven't suffered there enough already.
Oh, wow.
No, just bomb us more. It's fine. Sorry, that was.
There was also another part in that article, in one of the podcasts, about how Sam Harris was being unfairly maligned for being like Trump.
Yeah.
But I mean, like that is true in the sense that, like, I mean, Sam Harris is, probably, not as bad as Trump, but I mean, in the sense that his stubbornness is pretty
legendary.
much up there. Trump, right? Like it's like that one podcast where he wanted to look at Muslims in airports or something, profile them. And then he had like an actual somebody that was actually a security expert come on and explain to him that it wouldn't work, and then he was like, well, he's just too woke or something like that. Like it was just
this was an extended email exchange in which one of the many in which Sam Harris has had his ass handed to him very handily.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Trump would do, right? Like if Trump if you tell Trump that he's wrong about something, he'll just continue to say that he's right. He's the best at everything. He knows everything, and Sam Harris is like, well, I can meditate and not see my face. It's pretty close, right? Like, I mean,
yep.
To me, it's a fair comparison.
I do think that there are some really interesting parallels that you can draw. Obviously, Sam Harris is chiller. Obviously, he's smarter. Obviously, he reads sometimes, which is all things that I'm not sure you would accuse Trump of doing or being. But it's not just that he himself is always right. It's that everybody who criticizes him is crazy, or they're horrible, or they're bad faith. Like, never in his entire life has Sam Harris been criticized by an honest person. It's amazing, and these kind of attacks, I think it's also interesting to note that, we're both talking about a couple of very privileged people who came from very wealthy backgrounds. His mother was that Golden Girls person. They haven't necessarily had to ever be out and be a working class person living and doing their own thing. So they have these backgrounds of privilege. They don't take criticism well at all. They just plain don't take it. There's always something wrong with you if you're criticizing them, because they are always right.
Well, Sam Harris called me mentally ill. So, you have to be mentally ill if you're going to disagree with Sam Harris. You can't be of sound mind and not mentally ill and, telling the truth.
Other IDWs also share this foible, right? Because, I mean, for example, Dave Rubin, whenever he gets criticized, will go on Twitter and be like, they're trying to pull me down and silence me. And same with the Weinstein, at least Eric Weinstein does pretty much the same thing as well.
Yeah.
That,
there
or
always
they just
some big conspiracy, like trying to silence their Nobel Prize-worthy views or something.
Yeah, but Sam Harris is too, right? He thinks that people are trying to bring him down, and he's right, and they're just trying to be dishonest. They don't actually believe that, they're just being unfair to him, right? Like that, it's the same kind of mindset, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
They're just trying to cancel his high-level ideas, like Dave's. But I just want to point this out. I know that this point has sort of been made, but it's just, this was literally said and in these words, and I think it's so ridiculous. At a certain point in the podcast that we're talking about, he literally says that the atheist community won't have Sam Harris anymore.
It's just,
he says that. Like, what? Come on.
What planet is this? Because
what multiverse is this? It's like,
maybe if you shrunk the entire atheist community into Steve Shives, maybe.
I would like to second that. Let's just do that.
It's funny to me that one of these examples that Eli was using, well, who are the atheists that they're talking about? P.Z. Myers? No, not him. And it's funny because P.Z. Myers himself disagreed with Eli on this minimization of the harm of new atheism on Twitter. Just yesterday or today, he's like, this is gatekeeping. I've experienced nothing but abuse and pile-ons from the scene. And Eli was like, oh, well, I haven't experienced any of that. I'm so sorry you have, but...
And not only that...
I wonder why, Eli.
If you're just going to praise this stuff, there's going to be no friction. You're not going to experience that.
Not only that, P.Z. Myers actually said that he identified at one time as a new atheist, and he disavowed the term because he was just like, I no longer want to be identified as this because it's toxic. So that's another interesting PZ connection with all of this.
PZ wrote an entire blog post just completely co-signing the Godless Grifters Phil Torres piece, by the way. So there's no question about where PZ stands on this.
Yeah. And then just such dishonest comparisons, would you stand for something like how Jews merged with the far right because Ben Shapiro exists? you wouldn't accept that, so why would you accept this? It's not at all the same. Does anyone want to elaborate on why it's not the same?
You just wanted to tee that one up for me, didn't you?
Go for it, Daniel. In his rant, there was something about Al Sharpton. Do you think BLM is bad because of what Al Sharpton said? He
references Jesse Jackson.
That was in his tweets, but in his rant, he references Al Sharpton. Okay.
Well, this is complete ahistorical nonsense, because it turns out that there are divisions between high-level members of kind of the civil rights era in the 60s and the Jewish community. There was anti-Semitism that happened in that place, and later, including the 80s, there's a very prominent example in which Jesse Jackson used an ethnic slur to describe New York City that was, referencing Jews. This is one time in 1984, and then kind of a continuing relationship with Louis Farrakhan. Now, Louis Farrakhan has been thoroughly criticized by many, many people on all sides of the political aisle for his vicious homophobia and anti-Semitism. Louis Farrakhan has been kind of he's still alive, but he really has not been of any kind of degree of huge importance since the mid-90s. And of course there's a conversation to be had about when can you ally with people who have kind of odious views in terms of kind of building kind of social movements that work that out. There's a huge complicated conversation around that, which Bosniak completely elides because he's trying to compare atheists and Jews as kind of equivalent groups. And I'm not even saying that I want to kind of argue this on the merit. I don't feel like Bosniak's tweets on this regard have even enough content in them to be worth discussing, is what I'm trying to get at here. It is so ahistorical and so divorced from any kind of political reality around the actual real divisions in the civil rights era around this topic that it's just completely meaningless drivel that no one should be considering in the slightest, if you want to be an honest, serious, good faith person in this conversation. And honestly, again, I find it pretty despicable that Bosniak on this Salon article decides to go to, but what about anti-Semitism from Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton? It's just, sorry to get emotional about this, but it is as someone who studies far-right movements and who studies the history of racism and civil rights and all this kind of complicated stuff, as someone who spent a lot of time on this, to just kind of blithely throw that out, it is absolutely, absolutely disgusting to me.
Just wanted to pop in here to add, because I guess I forgot to make this point while recording, that this is just absolutely not comparable, because Sam Harris, Dawkins, Shermer, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Pinker, these are not random atheists that just happen to have overlaps and sympathies with the right and far right. These are the most prominent, celebrated names and faces of movement/new atheism. These are the influencers and people with the largest platforms and the ability to shape the movement. And they have. Ben Shapiro isn't the face of Judaism. He doesn't shape it. And like Daniel said, this type of comparison, especially when bringing BLM into it, is just so disingenuous and ahistorical.
When he summarizes towards the end his arguments, he says literally something to the effect of, I have it here, how in the shit fuck could that help the movement?
So eloquent.
Yes, I know. And he's talking about the entirety of the article. And, of course, I think at this point we all realize that that's not what the article was doing. But let's say hypothetically that it was. I don't think that it's necessarily the job of the writer to create a piece that is going to further the kind of goals of atheism. That's a weird thing to say, but I can't think of another way to put it. I mean, it's just, he goes on to say that social justice is what atheism is. That's I'd love that to be the case, but I don't think that that's really the case. And I just think that when it comes to how in the shit fuck could that help the movement, it's just like, I mean, to me, the main reason why the movement isn't where it should be is because the main influencers out there, as I said before, are these people that are being discussed in the article still. We haven't moved on from there. They're still the most popular, and their early work that they did when they were officially New Atheists, and New Atheists was officially a thing, it still reverberates within the movement, and people still cite their books as being incredibly influential and whatnot. So,
and now their podcasts, even if they aren't specifically talking about atheism, or even if they haven't listed their podcast under the atheism category, or even if they're not burning crosses at atheist conferences, they still speak to many, many people in the new atheist movement. They still push them further right. This whole movement, very few people, even right-wing atheists, very few of them are still stuck on just atheism. They have either moved on to anti-wokeness, anti-CRT, or the left side of atheists have moved on to other stuff. So it's such a dodge to say, oh, they're not specifically talking about atheism. Yeah, but that's how they're staying relevant, is that they're talking about the things that people are talking about more now.
What would really help secular movements online would be to honestly engage with the criticism that is coming into it and then do something about it.
Yeah, to stop making excuses for this.
Absolutely.
This is why we are not moving on from this conversation for the past, 2 weeks. It's not, if some right-wing atheists were to make, some angry blog post about Phil Torres' article, it wouldn't even register, because I don't really care. It's established those guys are assholes. They have zero credibility with me and people that, I think listen to me, or, just in the same circles as me. So it doesn't matter what they're saying, really. But the people who are making excuses for this on the left are very, very alarming to me, because they're reviving credibility for this scene, which over the past few years has received a lot of well-deserved criticism and has been exposed to a great degree. But they are now trying to pull us back and defend this shit. So that's why we're here.
It would also be good if there's been so many opportunities in the past and recently for the atheist community to come together and defend minority rights.
Yeah.
And they've either just stayed silent or actively defended abuse against minorities. So
Yeah.
If they really wanted to fix their movement, then that's what you would need to do. You would need to get enough either new content creators or existing content creators to say, this isn't going to be what our movement is about. We're not going to attack minorities. And if you do, then we're going to stand against you as a unit. And that doesn't happen. What usually happens is a big atheist creator makes some kind of attack against minority group, and you'll have a sporadic amount of people that are usually small, saying, no, we don't agree with that. And then the bigger ones just either stay silent, or they'll bring it up, or they'll both sides it, or something, right? Given out to that creator, instead of just saying, you know what, this isn't going to be, we don't want this. We don't want this in our movement. We want to make that the tent we want to make includes minorities, not bigots.
And will not treat minorities as if that they're something that we could argue in very calm tones about how we should or shouldn't treat them, or if it's okay. I mean, when we talk about someone like Rationality Rules, who was sort of the figure at the right in the middle of the ACA drama last year because of his transphobia.
Both videos still up, still getting views, by the way.
He is obviously a very much in the mode of Sam Harris. He's like a clone of him, in many ways. That is clearly who has influenced him, where he is coming from. there's so many parallels you could draw between the two of them, and not in a good way, because he's no better at looking at things that are complicated. Like, if you want to talk about feminism, the Middle East, Islam, Muslims, that is such an incredibly complicated historical, cultural conversation to have, but he just wants to look at it in very ahistorical, acultural. The problem is, if you see here, it's the Quran. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. End of story. Like, no,
black and white.
Yeah, rationality rules is very much like Sam Harris and Mr. Dave Rubin, because I haven't checked out his channel too much, but I remember after the whole debacle that you're talking about, the transphobic stuff, he very soon had Sargon of Akkad on his channel, and they had this like very faux debate. I don't even think you could call it a debate. It was very chummy. They were laughing at each other, or at each other's jokes, and there was no I'm fine with having a debate with that gentleman, but he wasn't pushing against anything that he had to say, or if he was, barely at all. And of course, yeah, that is very much like Sam Harris. Sam Harris is having these people like Ben Shapiro and whatnot, and they're, when there are matters of disagreement, it's not like he's pushing that hard, and overall, those people are getting a push from him, and he is kind of framing these people as people who are just like they're great because they're willing to have these calm, rational debates, and that's the same thing he was doing with Sargon.
He did it with Stefan Molyneux too. He had Stefan Molyneux on, and they talked about ethics, as if you would ask a white nationalist about ethics. Like they have nothing to say about that. So I said in a tweet, listen, you probably shouldn't be having a white supremacist on to talk about ethics. And Cosmic Skeptic jumped in and said, no, I support this. This is a good idea. And then, even other atheists on Twitter were like, I think GC is right about this. Like, and then they did this debate, and not once did he talk about like any of his white supremacy. They just talked about this weird thing, even though Stefan Molyneux kept pushing to try to get RR, because he literally says during the debate, like something like, we're not too far apart on a lot of issues, right? Like, sure, we disagree about this one issue, this ethics thing, but other than that, we're pretty thick, so it was obvious that he was trying to feed off of RR's audience, and I think RR was feeding off of Molyneux's as well. And he did the same with Sargon of Akkad, and he spends his time making videos praising, like he'll start off the video praising them, like Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, and things like that, right?
When Tim Harris had an ex-neo-Nazi on and he criticized Stefan Molyneux too hard, Sam Harris's audience got super mad, and Sam Harris is the one that ended up, cutting out Christian Picciolini's criticism of Molyneux, as well as his own criticism of Molyneux from that podcast. So, right. The connections are just endless. You could just talk about these overlaps constantly. And speaking of Sargon and atheist conferences, it is interesting that MythCon hasn't been brought up, with all the
I was going to say, we haven't even brought up MythCon.
Yeah, with all the Kekistan flags
NaziCon,
and the Pepe flags and shit.
At this point, like MythCon, it's a completely. I'm not saying that it was ever this fantastic thing, because I don't truly know what it was like in the beginning, but now you have people like who run it who literally believe kind of QAnon shit, and I don't know if you know who Jack Posobiec is, but he's this like OAN reporter who was one of the main Pizzagate like conspiracy theory. They have these people at MythCon, and they like a Christian, but which is like okay, but this is like it started out as an atheist conference, and it just I mean, that's just another great example of how atheism in general, whether you want to call that new atheism or what, has gradually morphed or just merged with the right and has become increasingly just not about atheism. It's about just a whole variety of toxic, horrible things, from anti-feminism to Black Lives Matter are a bunch of terrorists to, what have you.
That's exactly how the grift happens, though, right? Like, it started out talking about atheism. They gathered a certain amount of audience doing that, and then they moved on to other things, which are like what they kind of push as being like religion, right? Like ideologies that they disagree with, like feminism or wokeism and all that, and that's how they make their money, right? Like that's literally, like, they just did what all the new atheists have kind of done, right?
Yep. Yeah. So here's a quote that I think was really interesting. This is from Eli's. What movement has ever been made better by lying about it? What cause has been made better by scaring new people away from it? And I mean, to me, this is just such a stunning lack of self-awareness, because I feel like this desperate grasping at straws and this desperate denial just because your brand has atheism in the name of it, that is the lying. That is the scaring new people away from it, because I just saw someone on Twitter recently say that as much as she dislikes Sam Harris, there are some supposed progressive bros that keep her away from the atheist scene because of their constant denial of the widespread issues and hatred that she's experienced in the scene. So how do you just say this about...
They've already pushed away trans people. They've pushed away women. Yeah. I mean, before I switched, when I was just doing atheist content, if you look at my YT, whatever they're called, stats or whatever, I think something like 96% of my audience was guys. Yeah. Right. That didn't change until I realized what was happening and changed my content. And it's slowly reverting back, going back. But I mean, that's just what atheism's like online, right? They've already kind of, I don't know how many times I've been told by people, look, I like atheist content, but I don't want to be part of that scene because it's terrible, right? And it's so true. So
it's cringe. I mean, that's honestly, there were a lot of reasons why I went from Creationist Cat to Hey It's Vadim. Partially it was that I had been doing the character for a very long time, and he may come back here and there, but still, that was part of it. But I also wanted to rebrand because I just wanted to, I recognized that people saw me, whether I liked it or not, as kind of part of the whole atheist / skeptic scene, which unfortunately has all of this toxic baggage now. And I was just like, yeah, you know what? It's probably better that for me to not have these direct associations anymore. And I wish that wasn't the case. Again, yeah.
I've always wanted to ask you, Vadim, how did you sidestep becoming one of the alt-righters? It seems like almost every other atheist content creator at that time was making anti-feminist stuff, and I don't think you ever did. So I don't know how did you miss that?
I will try and put this in as succinct a way as I can, because I could go on for a long time about it. It was hell. It was definitely hell. Seeing there were just so many steps along the way where I thought oh my God, the atheist skeptic scene can't get any worse than this. And then literal Nazis are being brought on for conversations, for polite conversations, and
not on this show.
It's not on this show. True. But yeah, I very early on, I'll just say this. In the very beginning, I bought in slightly just a tiny bit into the bullshit. I did not like seeing all of this because I've always had friends who were feminists. I've always had friends who, and yes, and I considered myself such. But I always, I came from New York, came from a very open-minded. I was always pro BLM, yada yada yada. And there was this very brief period where all of a sudden people were demonizing SJWs, and I thought a lot of it was crap, but I thought, I haven't been around. I've been living in Florida. I haven't been in this. Maybe there is this trend that's going on, and maybe it would be good to hold up a mirror, because it would be good for people to kind of just reevaluate a little bit, and maybe we can calm down. But then I realized, no, I'm being a fucking moron. They're cherry picking things. Mm-hmm. They're making a lot of things that really aren't a big deal into a big deal. And I realized I actually did make, none of it, I never made any content that was hateful. I never made any content that was, really, I would say, incendiary. But I made some content that sort of fell into that, and I started getting good views. But then I realized, oh my God, this whole thing is because I thought people were going to move on from there, in a month or two. And then I realized, no, this is being weaponized by the right. I started noticing people like Milo and people like Paul Joseph Watson and Stephen Crowder were being kind of just greeted with open arms, whereas one time they were very
Ruben had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, and so I was just there was a point where very quickly I just realized, okay, I'm an idiot. This is bad news being used for the wrong reasons, and I don't want to feed into it. And the last thing I'll say is, for a short period of time, I wanted to speak up, and I didn't, because I knew that there were going to be repercussions against my channel. And then it just got so bad that that's all I ended up doing. I got more and more vocal about criticizing people who were considered either atheists or skeptics. And yes, it had a terrible effect on my channel, on the growth of my channel. Lost over 15,000 subscribers, lots of Patreon money. Mm-hmm. And I would say that my channel is in a better place than it has been in a long time, but it's still never fully recovered. It never got the momentum that it had then. But at the end of the day, I'm glad. I'd rather be able to look at myself in the mirror than not had spoken up about that stuff. So there you go. Sorry if that was a ramble, but it's just there's a lot I left out, believe me.
Yeah, I've been through a similar journey as well, but it can be done. It can be done if it matters to you, and just shooting out. It shows
that all three of us have had pretty much the exact same experience.
Yeah.
In terms of how we were treated and what happened to our channels and our patrons and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely. And then you end up being, ostracized from that community as a troublemaker or drama merchant or something like that. When really the drama is the people that are attacking, people that can't or have a harder time defending themselves.
Right. And then, just here are some more quotes that I would love to hear you guys' responses to. Surely religion hasn't done anything problematic lately. Surely the real problem is an associate professor at Portland U who can't even get tenure because he's a joke. And then there's one where this is an excuse to sit back and do nothing until the perfect movement comes along. Then when there are no assholes, no disagreements, that's when I'm really going to roll up my sleeves and do something.
So that second one is what I was talking about earlier, about how if they actually want to change things, it's not that you're ever going to have a perfect movement, but you're going to have a movement that actually cares about issues and will stand up to people outside of or inside or outside of that movement that threaten that, right? Like, so, against trans people, just for example, you're going to have, if the core of atheist creators were stood against RR, that would have been a huge turning point. That could have been a huge turning point. And I remember saying at the time, let's make a video, like all of these people that I at the time were close with. Let's make a video in solidarity, saying that we support trans people. We support trans people's right to it's really a human right to compete in the gender that they associate with. And I was turned down by every major. I had like minor atheist channels, like like me, but I mean, like a couple hundred or whatever say yes, but the larger ones, the ones that were over 10,000 subscribers, say all said. What they said, no, we talk about that on our channel all the time, so we're not going to do that, right? So stuff like that, like they just like copped out. So that could have been a huge turning point, just like Elevator Gate could have been a huge turning point. But that's the thing; it
seems like it's all very flipped on its head. Like in these guys' perspectives, it's like the people trying to do the work to move past and evolve and take a stand against bigotry in the scene are the ones that are being told to shut up. And
exactly,
I don't understand. Chrissy, what are your thoughts on this?
I totally agree. Like, what do you think we're doing? We're not. we're fighting this, and we're fighting it on multiple fronts, unfortunately. And yes, has religion done problematic things? Yeah. And of course, they're going to continue to do that, and we're going to continue to be an issue. But and maybe, Daniel, you can back me up a little on, like, for instance, this new group. I think they're called FAIR.
Yep. I've been kind of vaguely looking into them, but yes, I'm aware. Yes.
I am not aware. Can you explain, please?
Oh, I want to.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Polite Conversations. You can support this podcast by sharing the shit out of it, making some noise about it, or contributing via Patreon. Patreon.com/Nice Mangoes. No E in mangoes. Also, you can follow me on Twitter @Nice Mangoes. If you want to make a one-time donation instead of a monthly Patreon one, you can do so via PayPal. nicemangoes.blog@gmail.com. Remember, no E in mangoes. If you've got an interesting story and would potentially like to be a guest, you can email me there too.